Well, good morning. While I'm getting set up here, I will say I need to thank the Jays this morning. Josh and just reaching out early in the week and in preparation, saw that I was speaking and wanted to know what they could prepare ahead of time and what songs and what passage. So I appreciate that. And then Justin this morning responding right away, being willing to fill in on the table this morning. So, and I appreciate those that I kind of gotten into a routine that Sunday mornings I get up and while I'm drinking my coffee, I'll normally start looking at the schedule and texting those that are on the roster. And it just, for those of you that get those texts and respond to those texts, it really just makes the service go smoother. And especially when I'm prepping for a sermon, it kind of takes some of that off. So I really appreciate those that are willing to get those texts in the mornings and respond. And like I said, just makes things go a little better. Several years ago, and it's been several years ago, so I'm going to probably miss some of the facts, but I never let the facts get in the way of a good story. We used to go camping when the kids were younger. We'd go camping with the Laughlins, and Mike had a really, as I recall, it was a pretty good-sized tent. I think it was at least 2 bedrooms. It may have been bigger. Had a tent that we could all get in. The girls were much smaller, so we could sleep in that tent. And if you know Mike, he takes care of his stuff, right? He takes it and usually has everything in a crate and takes good care of it, puts it away right. And so we had this tent, and we'd gone camping several times and kept us safe, kept us, sheltered, kept us out of the elements, and it was a good place for us all to be together when we were camping. But at some point along the way, that tent got put away wrong. Could have been me that put it away wrong. Could have been one of the kids. Could have been Mike in a hurry. Or maybe just got jostled, right? But it doesn't really matter. At some point, it got put away wrong. And what I remember is that Mike was trying to get this tent untangled. We were out in his backyard. And so Stacy and I were back there with him. Bev was back there with him. I think all the girls had one. We've all got a piece of this tent, right? And we're just going under each other. We're twisting it around. And we're all just kind of doing our own thing, trying to help make this tent straighten back out. I don't know how the tent even got in the condition that it was in, but it was bad, and we were just making it worse. And finally, Mike just picks up the tent and goes and throws it in the fire. He's done with it, right? I tried to find it, but there's and those of you that know Mike, that's you can just picture him taking this tent and wordlessly just going and throwing this thing in the fire, and we all just watched it burn. And there's a picture of it somewhere. So hold that story. We've been studying stumbling blocks to our faith. And the schedule came out, and my topic this week was the challenges of marriage. And I'll tell you, I struggled with that because, marriage is not supposed to be a challenge, right? Marriage is not supposed to be a stumbling block to your faith. So how do you reconcile that? How do you put that into the as a stumbling block, right? How do we talk about that? And so then as I start thinking through it, I was talking to Andy a little bit about what we were looking for, and he said, there's just so many people that we know whose marriages maybe aren't what they are, or they're not as fulfilling as they need them to be, or they're struggling with it. And those are the ones we know, right? There's others that we don't know. There's people that suffer in silence, and there's people that just have little issues that come up. So please understand, I'm not thinking of any specific person or couple. We're going to talk a little bit about when marriage becomes a stumbling block, and I can't list everything that's going to happen. And I can't specifically address every situation that comes up. But what I want to do is maybe give some guidelines and some principles. Let's just look at some basic Bible principles and ways that we should be treating each other, and take those and say, all right, when the marriage is the stumbling block, how do we get over that? How do we get around that? If you look at, I've got several passages I'm going to go through. I've only got a few that I'm going to actually put up on the projector this morning. But look, if you will, to Matthew 19, starting in verse 4. It says, and primarily I'll be reading from the NIV this morning. Haven't you read, he replied, that at the beginning the Creator made them and made them male and female, and said, for this reason a man will leave his father and mother and will be united with his wife, and two will become flesh. And all the way back in Genesis 2, verse 18, the Lord God said, "It is not good for man to be alone. I will be a helper suitable to him." And in 1 Peter 3, verse 7, "Husbands, in the same way be considerate as you live with your wives, and treat them with respect as the weaker partner, and as heirs with you of the gracious gift of life, so that nothing will hinder your prayers." So early on, from the early days, when marriage was instituted, and God set it up, and there was this recognition that once you're knit together, you're on this journey together. You're one flesh, and this is your heirs in the reward that we'll have. I like the way Ecclesiastes 4, starting in verse 9, says, "Two are better than one, because they have a good return for their labor. If either one of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls, but has no one to help them up. Also, if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken." So this idea that we can help each other, that when the marriage is good and marriage works the way it's supposed to work, two people are working together toward a common goal. We've started using the phrase, we don't talk about stumbling blocks at work. We don't even talk about challenges really anymore. Mostly we talk about headwinds and tailwinds, right? So that when you have a goal, when you're trying to get something, you have the idea of headwinds and tailwinds. And when we do quarterly reviews or annual reviews, we take those into consideration. And obviously a tailwind is something that's working in your favor. A tailwind is, if you're biking, if you're flying, a tailwind is something that's making it easier. You're not having to work quite as hard. It's just helping you along. But a headwind, although it doesn't stop you, a headwind will slow you down. A headwind is something that you have to plan for. It takes more energy, takes more planning. I like to think of the stumbling blocks as not stumbling blocks. Maybe they don't trip us up, but maybe they're something that take that attitude of we have to work a little bit harder for it. We have to plan for it. It's gonna drag us down a little bit. We can still get through it, but we have to work around it, and we can work around it. As I was organizing my thoughts for this morning, I tried to put them in, maybe some concise orders. And I want to talk really about how to minimize or avoid the stumbling blocks that can come in marriage sometimes. I want to talk about if you find yourself in a situation, stop making it worse, all right? What are some ways we can stop making it worse? And then finally, we're going to talk about how to start making it better. But as I was compiling these scriptures, really so many of them can really support all the points. So I'd encourage you as we go through this morning, don't think of it as a, step 1, step 2, step 3, but look at it as the whole. Take all the scriptures that we're going to look at, all the principles we're going to look at, and just take them as a whole, not as this applies to this and this applies to that, right? Let's look at the whole, but I've got it organized a little bit more so we can talk about it. First, let's talk about how to minimize the stumbling blocks. You can't avoid them. You can avoid some of them, but you're not going to be able to avoid all of them. You've got to go into it with the idea that marriage is going to be permanent. When you enter that relationship, keep that mindset. That is, before you even start about marriage, don't think of it as a long-term roommate. Don't think of it as a relationship you're going to be in the next few years. Go into it with that mindset that this is a lifetime commitment. When we read Matthew 19, starting in verse 4 a while ago, the end of that passage, he said, "Haven't you read that at the beginning the Creator made them male and female?" And he said, for that reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united with his wife, and the two will become flesh. And then the rest of that says, "So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore what God has joined together, let no one separate." If you go into it with that attitude and that recognition that this is going to be forever, right away that should set the right tone and the right mindset. Recognize that there's going to be some stumbling blocks and some challenges. Sometimes you're in control of them. Sometimes it's financial things that you can control. Sometimes it's addictions and choices that someone has made. But sometimes they're beyond your control. Sometimes financial issues are beyond your control. Sometimes the health issues that come up are beyond your control. Sometimes it's one person. Sometimes it's the other. Sometimes it's both. Sometimes it's neither one of you. It's outside influences. But there's always going to be, every marriage is going to have some headwinds or some stumbling blocks that they're going to have to fight through. You can minimize those by remembering and choosing correctly. If you look at Joshua 24, and this is a verse that many of us have hanging in our house probably. Joshua 24, starting in verse 14. Joshua says, "Now fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away all the gods your ancestors worshiped beyond the Euphrates River and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods of your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates or the gods of the Amorites in whose lands you are living. But for me and my household, we will serve the Lord." If you start off with that mindset and prioritize and say that our house is going to serve God, and God is going to be our priority, and God is that this house and this household will serve God, that's going to avoid and minimize many of those stumbling blocks that you might come up with, those headwinds, and it will help prioritize and help you see just the worldview that you have as you're dealing with those. Choose a godly mate. For those of you that aren't married yet, take that serious. Try to find a godly mate. Proverbs 18, verse 22. "He who finds a wife finds what is good and receives favor from the Lord." Pray about it. We see in Genesis 24 when Abraham sent, even back in Genesis, when Abraham sent his servant to find a partner or a spouse for his son, the first thing that the servant did was pray about it. Help me find somebody that will be pleasing to you and Abraham. That will help you avoid so many of the issues or give you the tool set to avoid so many of the issues. When you're doing that, look past the physical beauty that will fade. Look at, if you will, at Ecclesiastes 12. "Remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the days of trouble come and the years approach when you will say, 'I find no pleasure in them.' Before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars grow dark and the clouds return after the rain, when the keepers of the house tremble and the strong men stoop, when the grinders cease because they are few, and those looking through the windows grow dim, when the doors to the streets are closed and the sound of grinding fades, when people rise up at the sound of birds, but all their songs grow faint, when people are afraid of heights and of dangers in the streets, and when the almond tree blossoms and the grasshopper drags itself along and desire no longer is stirred, then people go to their eternal home and mourners go about the streets. Remember him before the silver cord is severed and the golden bowl is broken, before the pitcher is shattered at the spring and the wheel broken at the well, and the dust returns to the ground it came from, and the Spirit of God who gave it." There's going to come a day when Stacy doesn't have the benefit of all this. She's gonna have to put up with me turning less attractive. So hopefully she didn't choose me for all of this. But seriously, it is so easy when you're young to look in the mirror and look around and think this is the way it's going to be forever. And I promise you, if you look around to the other parts of the building and you look around, you'll see a lot of older people, a lot of people that are stooped over, a lot of people that are wrinkled, whose skin is drier, whose teeth are not as strong, that once had the exact same thought that you're having right now. So keep that in mind as you're choosing your spouse. Don't let that be, when you're looking for a partner, don't get caught up on the physical beauty. Remember your vows to each other. When you're early on, and I was at a wedding in September recently, the Walkers were there. My dad did Brianne and Sam's wedding ceremony. And I was looking at his notes, and he recently retired from being a preacher at the age of around 72. He preached for well over 50 years. And his sermons, his marriage sermons, are pretty much the same. I went back and looked at the one that he did for me and Stacy, and I went back and looked at the ones he did for my brother and some others that he did, and it's pretty much the same. It's, do you promise to love, honor, cherish, and protect her, cleaving to her and only to her till death shall separate you? And then he asked the bride, do you promise to love, honor, cherish, and cleave to him until death do you part? You'll see other vows, and yours are probably similar to this if you've been married. For richer or for poor, for sickness and in health, good times and bad times. If you will remember that vow that you made and realize that it doesn't expire after a year, it doesn't expire after 5 years, it doesn't expire after 20 years, it doesn't expire after 50 years. Those are the vows that you made, and if you will remember those every day, that will help you also prioritize and avoid some of these headwinds and some of these stumbling blocks. If you're in a situation where the marriage has become challenging, arrest it and don't make it worse. Consider the instructions for a minute that we have just as Christians toward each other, toward our brothers and our sisters, toward others in the world. Matthew 5, verse 9, blessed are the peacemakers. Proverbs 15:1, a gentle answer turneth away wrath, and a harsh word stirs up anger. Right there. When you find yourself in a situation where the marriage has become contentious or there's disagreements, are you remembering to be a peacemaker, or are you gearing up for battle? Are you answering in a way that's going to turn away wrath, or are you just giving as good as you get? Matthew 5, verse 38. You have heard that it was said, eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn the other cheek also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. That principle there is talking about how we treat one another and treat the world around us. It should apply to our spouse as well, and it should apply to our partner. Why do we think that doesn't apply when it's within the same household? Be willing to forgive. Matthew 18, Peter says, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother and sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times? Jesus said, no, I say not 7 times, but 70 times 7 times. That's not just those around us. It's not just our brothers and sisters. It's our spouse. Be willing to forgive them. It doesn't matter how many times they've transgressed against you, or that you perceive they've transgressed. Be willing to forgive them. Colossians 3, verse 12. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with, now listen to this, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive one another. If any of you has a grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord forgave you. And over all these virtues, put on love, which bind them all together in perfect unity. Take a step back and ask yourself, things are not going well. Things have become contentious. The marriage has become a stumbling block. Maybe it's your fault, maybe it's not. But are you turning the other cheek? Are you coming at it with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience? Ephesians 4, starting in verse 29. Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only that which is helpful for building up others according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. And do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, with whom you were with whom you were sealed for the day of redemption. Get rid of all bitterness, rage, and anger, brawling, and slander, along with every form of malice. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as Christ forgave you. Ooh, that's tough, right? Make sure that everything that comes out of your mouth is building your partner up. I I got the wrong passage there. Sorry about that. Finally, look in Romans 1. I'm sorry, not finally, but look in Romans 1, verse 28. Furthermore, just as they did not think worthwhile to retain the knowledge of God, so God gave them over to a depraved mind. He gave them over to a depraved mind. Now listen to what he says a depraved mind is. So that they do what ought not be done. They have become filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, greed, and depravity. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, and malice. They are gossips and slanderers, God-haters, insolent, arrogant, and boastful. They invent ways of doing evil, that they disobey their parents. They have no understanding, no fidelity, no love, no mercy. Although they know God's righteous decree that those who do such things deserve death, they do not continue to do those things, but also approve of those who practice them. That wickedness there, those evil deeds that they're doing, one of them is gossip and slander. So when your spouse, your husband, your wife is not making you as happy as you want them to make you, how are you talking about that to others? How are you spreading that around? Are you slandering them? Are you gossiping about them? Proverbs 12:22 says, "The Lord detests lying lips, but he delights in people who are trustworthy." And even in Ephesians 4, it says, verse 25, "Therefore each of you must put off falsehoods and speak truthfully to your neighbor, for we are all members of one body." Don't lie. Don't lie to your spouse, even little lies. If you've gotten to the point where you're telling little white lies to your spouse about where you've been, what you're doing, who you're with, what you're spending money on, what you've bought, if you're covering up those little things, that should be a major red flag to you. If it's not already an issue, it will be. God says don't lie. That doesn't mean don't lie to anybody except your spouse when you're trying not to hurt their feelings. Don't lie. Be truthful with them. And going back to, again, Matthew 5 and verse 33, "Keep your vows. Let your yea be yea and your nay be nay," is the way that the King James says that. NIV says, all you need to say is yes or no. You made a vow. When you stood up and got married, you made a vow, a promise to your spouse. Are you keeping that vow? And if you're not, don't make it worse. Start keeping it. Just do what you said you were going to do. What excuse do you have for not keeping those vows, for not treating someone the way that you promised you would treat them? If these are the instructions that we're given to and the guidelines that we're given to treat our own brothers and sisters and those in the world, would it not so much more be how we're supposed to treat our own spouse, our own partner? And if you're in a bad situation, wouldn't just making that change, and I'm not saying it's easy, but just changing your attitude a little bit and doing those things, wouldn't that halt maybe some of the downward spiral and stop making it worse? Let's talk about how to make things better. Wherever you're at, prioritize God. If you're prioritizing God in your relationship, you'll solve the problems. Matthew 22, verse 30, Matthew 22, starting in verse 34. "Hearing that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, the Pharisees got together. One of them, an expert in the law, tested him with this question: 'Teacher, what is the greatest commandment in the law?' And Jesus goes back to Deuteronomy, and he replied, 'Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind.' That's the greatest commandment. And the second greatest, love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. Every other thing, being nice to each other, speaking kindly to each other, not lying to each other, they all go back to those those two commandments. Love God more than anything, and then love your neighbor as you love yourself." Spouses are to love each other, and love is not a something that just happens or you fall into, right? Hollywood, TV, music, pop songs, for years, they've given us this idea that you just look up, you see someone across the room, and you have absolutely no control. You're in love. Accidentally, just fell in love. God tells us love is a choice. Love is something that you do. Put away the songs, put away the Hollywood, put away the movies, the TV. Love is something that you do. It's something that you get up every morning and you make a choice to do. Look, if you will, to Ephesians 5. That's what I was looking for. Ephesians 5. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Wives, submit to your husbands, or wives yourselves to your own husbands as you do the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body, of which he is the Savior. Now, as the church submits to the Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. In the same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. After all, no one ever hated their own body, but they feed and care for their body, just as Christ does for the church. This just goes back to Matthew. This passage is just restating what Jesus said earlier when he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Your spouse even more so. Treat them, love them, and treat them with respect that you promised you would. Marriage should be honored by all, not by just one person, not just by both, by all. So keep this in mind when you're looking for counsel, and keep this in mind, those of you that aren't married, those of you that are helping or providing counsel, keep this in mind when others are talking to you or confiding in you, whether it's someone coming to you and saying, hey, I've got some issues, and if they're venting, or if it's somebody at work, or if it's somebody you're seeking out counsel for, the marriage should be honored. The marriage should be respected by all. Single people, and even other married people, keep that in mind when others are coming to you. Don't make it harder. Don't make it harder for that married couple to stay together. Don't put a stumbling block in their way. Don't make it more difficult for them and add to their troubles. Looking at, if you will, look at 1 Corinthians. Love is patient. Love is kind. Remember, these are choices that we make. These are the things that we should be doing. These are things that we're told to do, not that we just accidentally fall into. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects. It always trusts. It always hopes. It always perseveres. Love never fails. Ask yourself, how many of your marital stumbling blocks, how many of the issues that you're having could be resolved just by doing everything on this list? If you're really honest with yourself, whether it's a fight you had on the way to church this morning, or it's an ongoing spiral that's leading down and out, how much of it could be resolved if we just did this? Let's go back to our story. Remember that tent? At some point, every marriage starts off as something that can provide shelter and happiness and help, right? But at some point, maybe something went wrong. Maybe somebody made a mistake, somebody made an error in judgment, something happened. And now you've got two people, if you're not careful, you've got two people wrestling with this marriage, trying to pull it in different directions. And then if you're not careful, you've got outside people coming in, and everybody's got a piece of this marriage. And this person from work doesn't even believe in the institution of marriage, and they think you should just get out of it. And this person over here, they want what they think is best for you. They just want your happiness, right? And they're pulling a different way. And this person over here, they think they've got different ideas. Everybody's got, you don't know who's got ulterior motives and who's got alternative ideas. But at the end, you've got all these people tugging on it. And what happens is it gets so contorted and so out of shape that at some point, the couple just decides to pick the marriage up and throw it in the fire. And that's not what God wants. So let's stop it before it gets there. Let's stop making it worse, and let's start making it better. Imagine, if you will, that the person who designed that tent had been standing there watching the whole family contort this thing around and said, hey, I've got the plans right here. I can tell you exactly how to fix it. Everybody be still. Mike, you come over here. Bev, you walk under this way. Brett, you jump over onto this side, and could tell us how to do it. We've got those plans. God tells us how to treat each other. God tells us how to treat our spouses. God tells us how to fix these issues. And like I said, I'm not going to name every issue that I'm aware of and every issue I've ever seen, but I want to talk about the principles and the guiding concepts and what the Bible tells us that we can and should do. Seek wise counsel from someone that's got the same, if you're going to seek counsel, seek wise counsel from someone who's got the same end goal in mind, someone that wants to see you go to heaven, someone that cares if you go to heaven. Seek counsel from those people, not from someone who just wants you to be happy at no matter what cost. And I understand, and I'm sympathetic to those who may be in situations that are challenging in their faith. And like I said, regardless if it's just a recent argument, or it's an ongoing issue, or it's a pestering sore, or it's something that's spiraling out of control, doesn't matter. It doesn't change God's words. It doesn't change God's commandments. And some of these instructions may be hard, and some of them may be really hard depending on what the situation you're in, but that doesn't make them any less true. I said I don't like the culture that and the picture that they put on marriage, but there is a song that I like, and it's a few years old now. Ben Rector sings it, and the song is I Like You, but one of my favorite verses are on the bridge. It says, "Life is not the mountaintops, it's the walking in between, and I like you walking next to me." That's the way our spouse should be with our life. But keep in mind, this world, this life, this isn't our home. This marriage is temporary, and it should be helping us get to our eternal home. So don't let your marriage become an entanglement that prevents you from reaching your permanent goal. Don't get caught up in the here and the now and forget what we're really here for and what we're really striving for. If you're here this morning and would like the prayers of the congregation or to help with something that you're either in your marriage or even something else, or if you've never put on Christ and would like to do so this morning, I invite you to do so as together we stand and sing.